The CEO looked a single father straight in the eyes and told him he was completely replaceable. She expected him to swallow his pride, sign the paperwork, and hold on to the only job keeping his little family afloat. Instead, he quietly took off his employee badge, laid it on her desk, and walked away without raising his voice. Just seconds later, 3 disabled children vanished from the company's tracking system, and the woman who had dismissed him realized the only person who truly understood the missing safety details was already leaving the building. This is the story of Eli Dawson, a father who chose integrity over fear, and how one quiet act of courage changed far more lives than anyone could have imagined. The operations room at Lakeshore Children's Therapy Network was never truly quiet. Radios crackled, keyboards clicked. A wall of monitors tracked wheelchair-accessible vans moving through Grand Rapids beneath a sky the color of wet concrete. But the room went still when Camille Hart said, "No employee is so important that this organization cannot replace them." Eli Dawson stood across from her at the end of the conference table. 4 senior managers watched without speaking. On the main screen behind Camille, the new dispatch system glowed in neat rows of green routes and scheduled arrivals. Eli's worn yellow notepad lay open in front of him. "The authorized pickup lists are incomplete," he said. His voice remained steady. "Medication notes were shortened during migration. The flood detour for Fulton Tunnel is missing, and the visual communication cards aren't linked to the passenger files." Grant Keller shifted in his chair. "We've reviewed this 3 times. "You reviewed the fields the software accepted," Eli replied. "That isn't the same as reviewing what the children need." Camille's jaw tightened. The launch deadline had already passed once. 3 school districts were waiting. Board members had been calling since sunrise. "The system goes live today," she said. "Then I can't sign the safety approval." One manager lowered his eyes. Another slowly closed his laptop. Camille stepped closer. "You coordinate vans, Mr. Dawson. You do not decide the future of this network." Eli looked at the badge hanging from his neck. Behind the plastic card was a small blue felt mitten. Its crooked white stitching faded from years of being handled. For 1 second, his thumb rested against it. Then he lifted the lanyard over his head. Camille's expression changed only slightly. "What are you doing?" Eli placed the badge on her desk. The little mitten landed beside it. "You said I was replaceable," he answered. "Now you can find out." He turned toward the glass doors. A sharp alarm sounded from the wall behind him. One of the green route lines flashed yellow, then red. Grant leaned toward his monitor. Van 27 just left its assigned route. Camille looked at the passenger list. 3 children were inside. One name made the dispatcher beside her whisper, "Miles Carter." The map redrew itself. A blue navigation line curved east toward Fulton Tunnel, where rising water had already closed 1 lane. Camille stared at the badge on her desk, then at Eli's back. "Eli." He kept walking. Her voice broke through the room, louder this time. "Eli, come back." But the glass door had already closed behind him. 3 hours earlier, before alarms and conference rooms and impossible choices, Eli Dawson had been standing barefoot in a narrow kitchen, waiting for an old toaster that always seemed to need one more push before it agreed to work. Outside, a late autumn drizzle covered the streets of Wyoming, Michigan, turning every parked car into a sheet of gray glass. The little rental house creaked whenever the furnace started. It wasn't much, but it was warm, and that mattered. "Smells like burnt bread again," a cheerful voice called from the hallway. June Dawson appeared, wearing mismatched socks and an oversized school sweatshirt that had once belonged to her mother. She grinned before taking the first bite of toast. "You always know exactly when it's burned." "I know the smell," she laughed. Eli smiled despite himself. "Guess that makes you the quality inspector." She saluted with her toast. There had been mornings when the silence inside this house felt unbearable after Natalie died. 5 years later, silence still visited sometimes, but June had learned how to chase it away with ordinary conversations. A backpack leaned against the kitchen chair beside a poster board covered with colorful drawings. "You finished your presentation?" Eli asked. June nodded proudly. "It isn't really a presentation." She shrugged. "It's more like showing people how pictures can help kids who don't always use words." Eli looked at the carefully drawn symbols across the board. A smiling sun, a stop sign, a school building, a bridge. He recognized every one of them. "You made them even easier to understand. You said simple is usually better." "I did." She carefully slipped the poster into a protective sleeve. "Don't forget," she said. "Mrs. Alvarez said parents can come this afternoon." "I remember." "You'll be there?" Eli hesitated for the smallest fraction of a second. "I'll do everything I can." June's smile softened. "You always say that." Because it was the only promise he knew he could honestly keep. Before grabbing his jacket, Eli reached for the employee badge hanging beside the front door. A tiny blue felt mitten dangled behind it. Its stitches wandered crookedly across the fabric where 10-year-old hands had struggled to keep the thread straight years before. June stopped him. "Wait." She gently smoothed one loose corner of the mitten. "There. You know I could just sew it again." "No," she said. "Leave it like that." "Why?" "So you'll remember somebody's waiting for you." Eli squeezed her shoulder. "I never forget." She looked at him with surprising seriousness. "Sometimes work almost makes you." The words stayed with him long after they climbed into the old silver minivan. The engine hesitated before finally turning over with a tired cough. "Come on," Eli muttered. June laughed. "I think she's just cold." "I think she's planning to retire before I do." Halfway to school, his phone chimed through the dashboard. Another payment reminder. The after-school enrichment program would increase its monthly fee beginning next week. Eli glanced at the number for only a second before locking the screen again. One more bill, one more calculation, one more thing he would somehow make work. He didn't want June learning how to read worry by watching his face. When they reached the elementary school, children hurried through the light rain carrying bright umbrellas almost larger than themselves. June gathered her presentation board, then paused before opening the door. "Promise me something." "What?" "If you can't make it." She searched for the right words. "Don't tell me a big story afterward." Eli blinked. "I'd rather know the truth." He nodded slowly. "That's a fair deal." She leaned across the console and hugged him. Then she ran toward the school entrance, carefully holding the poster board above a puddle. Eli watched until she disappeared inside. Only then did he drive toward downtown Grand Rapids, unaware that before the afternoon was over, keeping one honest promise would cost him far more than a day's work. Morning traffic thickened as he crossed the Grand River. Delivery trucks rumbled beside commuters, windshield wipers moved in slow rhythm, and the skyline gradually rose through the mist. Lakeshore Children's Therapy Network occupied the first 3 floors of a renovated brick warehouse overlooking the river. It wasn't a hospital, and it wasn't a bus company. It was something in between. A place where transportation often meant the difference between a child receiving therapy or missing another week of progress. Eli entered through the staff entrance carrying a travel mug that had long since lost its lid. "Morning, boss," Denise Walker called from Dispatch Bay 3. She wasn't really calling him boss. Nobody did. But after 12 years behind the wheel of wheelchair-accessible vans, Denise trusted Eli more than any title on the organization chart. "How's van 27? Eli asked. "Brake lights fixed." "Lift?" "Tested twice," he nodded. "And miles?" Denise smiled. "Same old miles. That answer carried more meaning than most people realized. Miles Carter was 11 years old. Cerebral palsy had taken away his speech, but never his awareness. He noticed everything. Most strangers assumed silence meant confusion. Eli had learned years ago how wrong that assumption could be. He stopped beside a cabinet filled with laminated cards. Every route had a matching packet. Greenhouse, blue school, red stop sign, yellow medicine bottle, a simple bridge. Each picture had been designed large enough for children with limited movement to point toward. Several years earlier, after Miles had been dropped at the wrong entrance of a medical campus, Eli had stayed late for nearly a week creating the first version of the communication cards. June had spread colored pencils across their kitchen table and quietly suggested making the pictures simpler. "If they're too fancy," she'd said, "people look at the drawing instead of the meaning." She had been right. Now, nearly every driver carried a set. Denise tucked one packet into her route folder. "I don't know how we'd manage without these." Eli smiled. "They're only useful because you drivers actually pay attention." His computer chimed. A software migration report appeared. Route 27. Passenger profile updated. He opened the file. His smile disappeared. The small bridge icon beside Miles's emergency routing notes was gone. Eli clicked through 3 menus before finding the archived comments. Fulton Tunnel. Avoid during flood advisory. Marked as redundant. Automatically removed. He immediately restored the warning manually. A minute later, Grant Keller walked into dispatch carrying a tablet. "There you are." Eli turned the monitor slightly. The tunnel warning disappeared again. Grant barely glanced at the screen. The optimization engine cleaned duplicate entries. It wasn't a duplicate. The navigation software already calculates road closures. "It calculates reported closures," Eli answered. "That tunnel floods before it's officially closed." Grant folded his arms. "We can't keep filling the system with personal notes." "They're not personal. They're inconsistent. They're experience." Grant sighed. "You've got to start trusting the software." Eli looked through the dispatch window where Denise was helping Miles board van 27. The boy reached into his backpack and pulled out one of the laminated picture cards before carefully placing it beside his seat. Eli looked back at Grant. "Software only recognizes the problems somebody teaches it to recognize." Grant tapped his tablet. "The launch is happening today." Then he walked away. Eli quietly opened the passenger profile one more time. Without saying a word, he restored the bridge, warning again. For the second time that morning, Eli leaned back in his chair and watched the small bridge icon settle into Miles Carter's profile once more. It looked insignificant, no larger than a thumbnail on the screen. Yet he knew from experience that tiny details often decided whether a frightened child arrived safely or spent an hour terrified in the wrong place. His phone buzzed. A calendar reminder. June's classroom presentation. 3:15 p.m. He looked at it for a second before pressing dismiss. "I'm coming," he whispered to himself. The promise felt heavier than it had an hour earlier. Across the dispatch floor, drivers moved in and out, carrying route folders, coffee cups, and rain jackets. Radios crackled with routine updates. Van 12 leaving Riverside. Wheelchair secure. Running 3 minutes behind. Ordinary voices. Ordinary work? Exactly the kind of work most people never noticed unless something went wrong. Grant Keller appeared again, this time with 2 members of the IT rollout team following behind him. "They're starting the final synchronization," he announced. Several dispatchers exchanged uncertain looks. Noreen Ellis, the senior scheduling clerk who had worked beside Eli for nearly 7 years, rolled her chair closer. "They're really doing it today?" "So it seems." "You still think they're rushing?" Eli nodded. "I think they're trying to solve a human problem with clean data." Noreen looked toward the technicians. I hate when you talk like that. Why? Because every time you say something like that, she sighed, you end up being right. Before Eli could answer, every monitor on the dispatch wall briefly flickered. The familiar scheduling interface disappeared. A new dashboard faded onto the screens. Bright colors, animated maps, large performance charts. Everything looked cleaner, faster, simpler, almost beautiful. Grant smiled proudly. See? Nobody answered. Eli opened the first passenger profile. Several custom notes had been compressed into generic categories. Another profile no longer showed which entrance a nonverbal child used because loud automatic doors caused panic attacks. A third listed emergency medication, but no longer displayed the exact storage location inside the backpack. Nothing was technically missing. Everything important was harder to see. Grant noticed Eli scrolling. The information is still there. Not where the drivers need it. They'll adapt. The children shouldn't have to. Grant's patience was fading. We've tested this for months. You tested whether the software worked. Grant folded his arms. That's usually how software testing works. Eli met his eyes. I test whether children get home. The room fell quiet. Even Grant had no immediate reply. A few minutes later, the elevator doors opened. Camille Hart stepped onto the dispatch floor wearing a charcoal coat still damp from the rain outside. Conversation stopped almost instantly. She walked slowly through the room, studying the new displays with visible relief. So this is the future, one board member walking beside her said. It has to be, Camille replied quietly. Her eyes found Eli. Mr. Dawson. Ms. Hart, I understand you still haven't signed the final operational approval. I haven't. She glanced toward the glowing monitors. Every delay increases the chance that we lose 3 school district contracts, and every missing detail increases the chance that a child gets lost. Camille held his gaze. I'd like to discuss that upstairs. She looked at Grant. Bring Mr. Dawson to the executive conference room. Grant nodded once. 2:00. As Camille turned toward the elevators, Eli looked through the rain-speckled windows at the line of accessible vans preparing for their afternoon routes. Somewhere across town, June would soon be standing in front of her classmates, hoping her father would keep another promise. Eli picked up his notebook. Then he followed Grant toward the elevators, knowing the next conversation might decide far more than whether a software launch happened on time. The executive floor felt like a different building. The carpet absorbed every footstep. Framed photographs of smiling children lined the hallway, each one celebrating another partnership, another expansion, another successful fundraising campaign. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, downtown Grand Rapids disappeared beneath a curtain of cold rain. Grant held the conference room door open. Inside, Camille Hart was already seated. 2 board representatives occupied one side of the polished walnut table. The chief financial officer sat beside them, quietly reviewing spreadsheets. A legal advisor had a yellow folder open in front of her. The only empty chair faced Camille. Please, she said. Eli sat down without opening his notebook. Camille folded her hands. I'll be direct. I appreciate that. The districts expect the new dispatch platform this afternoon. Delaying it again could cost us contracts that keep this organization operating. Eli nodded once. I understand. Grant slid several printed reports across the table. Our testing shows 99.6% data accuracy. Eli looked at the pages. They don't measure the missing information. Grant frowned. They measure everything required. They measure everything the software recognizes. Eli turned the first page around. This child can only be released to his grandmother after 3:30 because his mother works nights. He picked up another. This one carries seizure medication in a blue insulated pouch, not a standard backpack. Another. This family enters through the West Therapy entrance because the automatic front doors trigger panic attacks. He placed the stack back on the table. Those details aren't extra. They're the job. Silence settled over the room. Camille leaned forward. So, what exactly are you asking for? 48 hours. Grant immediately shook his head. Impossible. Eli ignored him. 2 days to verify the high-risk routes, restore the visual communication files, and confirm authorized pickup records. The chief financial officer finally spoke. Do you know what a 48-hour delay costs us? Eli answered honestly. No. But I know what one preventable mistake could cost a family. Camille looked out the rain-covered window before returning her attention to him. Do you realize how many children miss therapy every day because transportation systems fail? I do. Then why are you willing to risk even more cancellations? Eli's voice remained calm. I'm trying to prevent something worse than a cancellation. Grant exhaled sharply. No system launches perfect. I didn't ask for perfect. What did you ask for? Safe. Camille opened the final document. The signature page, 1 line, 1 name, operational safety approval. She slid it toward him. Mr. Dawson, if this launch is postponed, the responsibility won't disappear. I know. Are you prepared to accept responsibility if hundreds of appointments are disrupted? Eli looked down at the blank signature line. For a moment, he thought about June, waiting with her presentation board, about the old minivan, about another bill arriving next week. He also thought about Miles quietly pointing to pictures, because words had never come easily. I've made mistakes, Eli said softly. I've stayed too late. I've missed dinners. I've tried to solve too much by myself. He met Camille's eyes. But I've never signed my name to something I believed could put a child at risk. Grant pushed the paper another inch closer. So you're refusing? I'm refusing to pretend unfinished work is finished. Camille's patience finally gave way. She stood slowly. I think you've begun to mistake your role in this organization. Eli said nothing. Her voice remained controlled, but every word landed harder than the one before. You coordinate transportation. You are not the organization. And no matter how valuable you believe your experience is, she paused, you are replaceable. The room became perfectly still. Eli's hand moved instinctively to the employee badge resting against his chest. His fingers closed around the small blue felt mitten hidden behind it. The crooked stitching brushed against his thumb. For an instant, he wasn't looking at the executives around the table anymore. He was standing beside the front door of his little house that morning, watching June smooth one loose corner of the mitten before telling him, "Don't let work make you forget who's waiting for you." He drew a slow breath. The conference room remained silent. Rain tapped softly against the windows 42 floors above the streets below. Camille waited. So? She asked. Eli carefully lifted the lanyard over his head. Grant frowned. Eli. He laid the badge in the center of the polished table. The little blue mitten slipped free and rested beside the plastic card, its uneven stitching somehow making the expensive room feel strangely ordinary. Camille stared at it. What are you doing? You said I was replaceable. His voice never rose. I'm giving you the chance to prove it. One of the board members shifted uneasily. This doesn't have to become dramatic. Eli looked toward him. It already is. Camille remained standing. You have a daughter. I do. You need this job. I need to look my daughter in the eye even more. Grant pushed the unsigned approval form across the table one final time. Just sign it. Eli didn't touch the paper. I've signed plenty of things I wasn't happy about. He glanced toward the rain-covered windows. Late nights. Extra shifts. Missed dinners. I accepted those because they were my burden. His eyes returned to Camille. I won't sign something that could become someone else's. The words hung in the room. Camille folded her arms. So, you're prepared to walk away. If that's what it costs. She searched his face for hesitation, for fear, for the moment he would remember rent, groceries, the old minivan, school fees, and decide that principles were a luxury. Instead, she found only quiet disappointment. "You won't quit," she said calmly. "Not really. You have too much depending on this paycheck." No one spoke. Camille continued. "People with families don't throw away stability over professional disagreements." Eli looked at the blue mitten beside his badge. Then he looked back at her. "My family is exactly why I won't sign." He turned toward the conference room door. The latch clicked softly as he reached for it. Behind him, someone finally exhaled. Then every monitor along the conference room wall flashed bright red. A sharp alarm cut through the silence. Grant spun toward the display. What? The live dispatch map refreshed. Van 27. Status unknown. Route deviation detected. The blue navigation line suddenly curved east instead of north, straight toward Fulton Tunnel. Dispatchers' voices erupted over the speaker system outside. "Van 27 isn't responding. I've lost live telemetry. Last signal was 90 seconds ago." Grant stared at the screen. That route shouldn't even exist. Camille's eyes dropped to the passenger list. Miles Carter, Emma Ruiz, Noah Bennett, 3 children. For the first time that afternoon, the confidence disappeared from her face. She looked from the map to the bridge warning Eli had refused to remove, then to the badge lying motionless on her desk. Only then did she understand what had just happened. She hadn't merely lost an employee. She had just sent away the one person who knew exactly why that route was dangerous. Eli. He stopped with one hand still on the door. Her voice was no longer firm. It carried something none of the executives had heard from her before. Fear. "Eli." She took one step toward him. "Please come back." Eli's hand remained on the door. He didn't answer. For the first time since entering the conference room, nobody cared about contracts, deadlines, or performance reports. Every pair of eyes was fixed on the flashing map across the wall. Grant hurried to the control console. "I'm trying to reconnect the van." His fingers raced across the keyboard. Nothing. The screen refreshed again. Signal lost. A dispatcher's voice burst through the overhead speakers. "Dispatch to Executive Operations. Driver Denise Walker has stopped responding to voice calls." Another voice followed immediately. Last GPS update placed Van 27 heading toward Fulton Tunnel. Camille felt her stomach tighten. She looked back at Eli. "You warned us." "I did." "And we removed the warning." "You did." There was no anger in his voice, only facts. Grant finally looked up. The navigation engine rerouted traffic after an accident on the freeway. It shouldn't have selected Fulton. "It did," Eli answered quietly. Camille took another step. "I'm asking you to help." Eli's eyes drifted to the badge still lying on the polished table. Beside it rested June's little blue mitten. He thought about the words Camille had spoken only moments earlier. "You're replaceable." He thought about the unsigned approval form. He thought about the mortgage payments, school fees, and the old minivan waiting in the parking garage. Then another image pushed everything else aside. Miles, 11 years old, quiet eyes, carefully pointing to picture cards because spoken words had never belonged to him. Years earlier, Eli had watched the frightened boy spend nearly 40 minutes inside a transport van after being dropped at the wrong hospital entrance. Miles couldn't explain the mistake. He had simply waited. No child should ever have to wait like that again. Eli slowly released the conference room door. "I'm not coming back because of this company." Camille nodded once. "I know. I'm not coming back because of my job." She swallowed. "I know." He looked directly at her. "I'm coming back because there are 3 children in that van." Without another word, he walked past the conference table. Grant immediately moved aside as Eli sat at the nearest operations terminal. "I need temporary access." Grant hesitated. "Your credentials? They won't work," Camille interrupted. She stepped forward and placed her own executive security card against the reader. The monitor unlocked. Every person in the room noticed what had just happened. The woman who had called him replaceable was now using the highest level of authority in the organization simply to let him help. Eli ignored the symbolism. His eyes were already moving across route maps, weather alerts, and archived passenger files. "Show me every change made to Route 27 in the last 24 hours. Grant pulled up the records. "They're gone." "What?" "The migration archived the original notes." "Archived isn't deleted. It isn't accessible from live dispatch." Eli closed his eyes for one brief second. "So the drivers are seeing simplified profiles." Grant's silence answered the question. Eli looked toward the rain streaking the windows. "Denise knows that tunnel." "She does," Grant replied. "Then why would she drive into it?" No one answered. Eli's fingers stopped above the keyboard. His expression changed. "Unless..." He reached for another database. The software never told her. At that same moment, several miles away, Denise Walker tightened her grip on the steering wheel as rain hammered the windshield. Behind her, Miles quietly reached into the seat pocket. He pulled out a laminated picture card, a simple drawing of a bridge, colored bright red. Miles held it with both hands, raising it high enough for Denise Walker to see in the rearview mirror. She glanced back for only a second. "Miles?" He didn't speak. He never had. Instead, he tapped the picture twice. Bridge. Danger. Bridge. Danger. Rain drummed against the windshield hard enough to blur the road ahead. The new navigation tablet mounted beside Denise flashed a calm blue line. "Continue 1.2 miles." She frowned. Something didn't feel right. Denise had driven children across Grand Rapids for more than a decade. She couldn't explain it, but every instinct told her she shouldn't be heading toward Fulton Tunnel. She reached for the radio. "Dispatch, this is van 27. Only static answered. She tried again. Nothing. The signal indicator blinked once before disappearing altogether. Behind her, Emma Ruiz quietly hugged her backpack closer. Noah Bennett looked out the side window as rainwater raced along the curb. Miles lifted the red bridge card again. This time, he held it directly beside the window where Denise couldn't miss it. She remembered something Eli had said during one of his safety meetings. If Miles keeps showing you a card after you've already seen it, assume he's trying to tell you something changed. Denise slowed the van. Ahead, traffic had nearly disappeared. The entrance to Fulton Tunnel came into view beneath sheets of rain. Water shimmered across the pavement. Not enough to close the road. Enough to make Denise uneasy. She eased onto the brake. Back at Lakeshore, Grant struck the keyboard again. "I still can't reconnect her." Camille stood behind him without saying a word. Eli was already opening archived route files from a local backup server. "They aren't in the live system," Grant said. "I know." "Then what are you looking for?" "The things your migration buried." His fingers moved quickly through folders labeled by year instead of software version. Driver notes, family requests, weather alerts, temporary detours. Then he found it. Route 27. Seasonal Advisory. He opened the file. "There's a drainage problem on the east side of the tunnel," Eli said. "It floods before the city's censors issue an official closure." Grant stared at him. "How do you know that?" "Because Denise reported it 4 years ago." Camille looked at the report. There was no engineering study, no consultant, no expensive analysis, just a handwritten note Denise had filed after sitting in traffic behind rising water one rainy October afternoon. Eli had never deleted it. Grant whispered, almost to himself. The migration flagged it as anecdotal. "It wasn't anecdotal," Eli answered. It was experience. Across town, Denise rolled her window down an inch. She listened. Not to the GPS, to the road. She could hear rushing water beneath the steady rain. Her grip tightened on the steering wheel. "No," she murmured. "We're not going through there." She steered the van into the parking lot of a neighborhood library just before the tunnel entrance. The children looked at her. Miles slowly lowered the red bridge card. For the first time in several minutes, Denise breathed. At that exact moment, Eli found the library listed in another emergency routing note. He grabbed the nearest phone. "Get me the Riverside Branch Library." Camille looked at him. "You think they're there?" Eli nodded. "If Denise remembered what I taught her." That's exactly where she stopped. Camille didn't speak. Grant immediately dialed the Riverside Branch Library, while Eli stood beside him, watching every second disappear from the clock mounted above the operations wall. The call connected. "This is Lakeshore Children's Therapy Network," Grant said quickly. "Can someone check your parking lot? We're looking for an accessible white van." A pause. Then the librarian answered. "Hold on. Yes, I can see it." Every person in the room stopped breathing. "3 children are inside. The driver is parked near the east entrance." Eli closed his eyes for a brief moment. "They're safe," he whispered. The librarian continued. "The driver says the GPS wanted her to continue through the tunnel, but one of the children kept showing her a red picture card. She thought it meant something was wrong." Eli looked toward Camille. It did. He asked the librarian to hand the phone to Denise. Seconds later, her familiar voice came through, tired, but steady. "I couldn't reach dispatch." "I know. The GPS kept insisting I go forward." "I know. I remembered what you said." Eli smiled for the first time all afternoon. "You trusted yourself." "I trusted the kids." "Good." He directed Denise to drive slowly to the nearby fire station where emergency personnel could check the children before continuing their route. When the call ended, silence returned. Not the tense silence from the conference room, a heavier one. Camille looked down at the reports scattered across the table. Then she quietly picked up the archived route file Eli had found. The page was stained by years of handling. At the bottom was a handwritten note. Driver, Denise Walker. Fulton Tunnel collects water before official closure. Avoid during heavy rain. No consultant had written it. No engineer had approved it. A frontline driver had simply paid attention. Camille turned another page. There were dozens more. Children who became frightened by certain sounds. Families who used side entrances. Emergency medication locations. Visual communication reminders. Small pieces of knowledge gathered one careful trip at a time. Grant stared at the stack. "I thought the migration removed duplicate notes." Eli shook his head. "It removed stories." Grant frowned. "What?" "Every one of these notes came from a real child." He gently tapped the papers. "You weren't deleting extra information. You were deleting experience." Camille slowly lowered herself into her chair. For months, she had believed the organization suffered because employees relied too much on individual judgment. Now, she saw something entirely different. The organization had survived because people like Eli had quietly filled the spaces no software knew existed. She looked toward the badge still resting where he had placed it. The little blue felt mitten lay beside it. Suddenly, it wasn't just a child's craft project. It represented every unseen responsibility Eli carried long before he entered her conference room. Grant finally spoke. "I followed the rollout standards exactly." Camille looked at him. "I know. You approved those standards." "I know." Neither of them said another word, because neither could avoid the same truth. Grant hadn't created the problem. He had faithfully carried out the priorities the organization rewarded: speed, efficiency, standardization. Those priorities had come from the executive office, from budgets, from quarterly goals, from Camille herself. She looked back at Eli. I didn't misunderstand one employee. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I built a system that taught everyone to overlook what mattered most. Eli didn't answer. There was nothing left to argue, only the difficult work that still waited ahead. Camille reached for her phone. "Cancel the full rollout," she said. Then she paused before adding the words no one expected to hear. "And schedule an emergency review of every safety decision that led us here." Outside, the rain continued to fall over Grand Rapids. Inside, the first real change had finally begun. By the time Eli walked out of Lakeshore Children's Therapy Network, the afternoon had already slipped away. His employee badge was still on Camille Hart's conference table. The blue felt mitten was still attached to it. His shirt collar felt strangely light without the familiar lanyard resting against it. He climbed into the old silver minivan and sat behind the steering wheel without turning the key. For several long seconds, he simply listened to the rain tapping against the windshield. His phone vibrated. 3 missed calls. 2 from numbers inside Lakeshore. 1 from Camille. He let the screen go dark again. There was nothing left to say until actions caught up with words. The drive to June's elementary school felt longer than usual. Every traffic light seemed to last forever. When he finally parked, the school lot was nearly empty. Children carrying colorful projects were already leaving with their parents. Laughter drifted across the wet pavement. Eli hurried inside. Mrs. Alvarez was stacking chairs when she noticed him standing quietly in the classroom doorway. "You made it," she said gently. "I know I'm late." She smiled with kindness that somehow made the apology feel even heavier. "They just finished." Eli looked toward the front of the classroom. Poster boards still leaned against the whiteboard. Construction paper bridges, simple picture cards, bright crayons. June sat alone at a table, carefully placing her drawings back into a blue folder. She looked up. For 1 second, her face lit up exactly the way it always had. Then she noticed his empty collar. The smile faded. "You don't have your badge." Eli instinctively touched his shirt before realizing there was nothing there. "No." "Did you lose it?" He walked over and knelt beside her chair. "I left it at work." She searched his face. "Were you fired?" Children often ask difficult questions without trying to soften them. Eli respected that. "I honestly don't know." She looked down at the picture cards spread across the table. Mrs. Alvarez quietly gathered the remaining supplies and stepped into the hallway, giving them privacy without saying a word. June picked up one of her drawings. It showed a bridge. This one was colored green. "You know why I changed the color?" Eli shook his head. "Red means stop." She turned the paper over. "Green means it's safe to go." He smiled faintly. "I like that." "I thought maybe someday Miles would need both." Eli looked at the drawing much longer than she realized. Without knowing it, June had helped create a language that had just protected 3 children. She had no idea. Neither did anyone else in her classroom. "Dad?" "Yeah?" "You promised you'd try." "I did." "And you came." "I came late." "But you still came." She slipped the green bridge drawing into her folder. Then her eyes narrowed slightly. "Where's my mitten?" The question caught him off guard. His heart sank. He could still picture it lying beside the badge on Camille's conference table. For the first time all day, he didn't know how to answer. "I forgot it." June didn't look upset, only surprised. "You never forget it." "I know." She quietly zipped her folder closed. "Maybe today was a really hard day." Eli laughed softly through a tired breath. "You could say that." As they walked toward the parking lot together, June reached for his hand. Neither of them spoke. Sometimes silence carried more comfort than conversation. Behind them, the classroom lights switched off one by one. Ahead of them waited an uncertain tomorrow. Inside Lakeshore, emergency meetings continued late into the evening. Outside, a father and daughter climbed into an aging minivan with no idea whether they would still have a paycheck next week. But for the first time in years, Eli realized something unexpected. He was frightened, yet he wasn't ashamed. And somehow, those were no longer the same thing. Just as he started the engine, his phone lit up once more. Camille Hart. He looked at the screen until the ringing stopped. Then another message appeared. "We need to tell the families the truth. Will you at least hear what I'm prepared to change?" Eli read the message twice before locking his phone. He didn't answer, not because he wanted Camille Hart to wait, because after everything that had happened, words had become the easiest part. The next morning, every local school district served by Lakeshore received the same email. The automated rollout had been suspended. Transportation schedules would continue under the previous system while an independent safety review took place. There were no excuses, no vague technical language, no attempt to blame a software vendor. Camille had signed the statement herself. By noon, she stood before the board of directors and accepted responsibility for approving performance standards that rewarded speed while overlooking frontline judgment. Grant Keller sat along the wall, saying nothing. When someone suggested placing the entire failure on the implementation team, Camille shook her head. No. The implementation team followed the priorities I approved. If accountability stops below my office, then I haven't accepted any. The room fell silent. Before sunset, she signed 3 emergency policy changes. Drivers could immediately stop a route whenever they believed conditions were unsafe without fear of disciplinary action. Every family would be notified whenever safety procedures changed, and every operational review would include frontline employees before new software could be approved. It was only the beginning. She knew that real trust would take much longer. Late that afternoon, Camille drove alone to the East Side Community Center. Children were playing basketball in the gym while volunteers packed food boxes for families in the cafeteria. Near the back entrance, Eli was helping an elderly volunteer repair a broken wheelchair ramp hinge with a borrowed socket wrench. He wasn't being paid. He hadn't been asked. He simply noticed the problem before someone got hurt. Camille waited until the repair was finished. Only then did she walk over. "I brought these." She held out a small paper bag. Inside rested Eli's employee badge. Behind it hung the little blue felt mitten. He looked at it for several seconds, but didn't reach for it. "I should have returned it yesterday," she said quietly. "You had more important things to do." "I had consequences to face." She nodded toward the repaired ramp. "You still stopped to help." Eli shrugged. "Someone would have tripped." "And you don't work for this building." "I don't have to." Camille lowered her eyes. "I finally understand that." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Children laughed somewhere inside the gym. A basketball bounced against polished hardwood. Life kept moving. "I owe you an apology," Camille said. "You do." "It isn't enough." "No. I used authority to silence someone who was trying to protect children." Eli met her eyes. "You also built a system where people learned it was safer to stay quiet than to disagree." She didn't defend herself. Instead, she handed him a folder. Inside were the policy changes already approved. Driver stop work protection. Mandatory frontline review panels. Written anti-retaliation procedures. Paid participation for families and drivers during future safety design. Eli turned each page slowly. Then he closed the folder. "This is a beginning." "I know. I can't come back to the same job." "I'm not asking you to." Camille took a careful breath. What would it take? Eli looked toward the families unloading groceries from volunteer cars. Then he spoke with the calm certainty of someone who had already made peace with losing everything. "If I ever return, it won't be because you forgave me. It will be because the next person who speaks up won't need courage just to be heard." He placed the folder under his arm. I'll write down exactly what has to change. Camille nodded. I'll be waiting. For the first time since they met, neither of them was trying to win the conversation. They were trying to deserve what came after it. That evening, Eli sat alone at his kitchen table after June had gone to bed. He unfolded a blank sheet of paper. At the top, he wrote only 4 words: conditions for coming back. He wasn't writing a list for himself. He was writing it for every driver, every dispatcher, every family, and every child who trusted strangers to bring them safely home. The document took Eli nearly 3 hours to finish. He crossed out sentences that sounded angry. He rewrote them until they sounded useful. When he finally printed the last page, there were no demands for a bigger office, a higher salary, or a better title. Instead, the first line read, "Every employee has the authority to stop transportation if they believe a child's safety is at risk." The second required frontline drivers, dispatchers, therapists, and parents to review every major operational change before it could be approved. The third guaranteed written protection for anyone reporting safety concerns. The fourth requested flexible scheduling so he could pick up June from school 3 afternoons each week. Nothing on the list benefited only Eli. Everything strengthened the people who would still be there long after him. 3 months later, he still wasn't back at Lakeshore as an employee. He worked as an independent consultant while the new safety policies were tested and rewritten. Sometimes he disagreed sharply with Camille. Sometimes she rejected his first recommendation. Sometimes he admitted she was right. The difference was simple. No one was punished for speaking honestly anymore. When the board finally announced a nationwide search for a new director of family access and safety, Camille refused to appoint anyone herself. An independent hiring panel interviewed candidates from across Michigan. Eli sat through the same process as everyone else. Weeks later, he received a phone call while replacing a loose handrail outside a neighborhood community center. "You've been selected." He looked across the parking lot where June was reading beneath a maple tree. For a long moment, he couldn't answer. When he finally thanked them, his voice barely rose above a whisper. His first morning back at Lakeshore looked nothing like the day he had left. There were no speeches, no photographers, no celebration. Drivers were already checking tires. Dispatchers were answering phones. Children were arriving for another ordinary day. Exactly as it should be. Denise passed him in the hallway carrying route folders. "Good," she said with a grin. "Now maybe someone will finally fix the coffee machine." Eli laughed. "I'll add it to the safety report." Months passed. The new review panels became routine. Parents attended planning meetings. Drivers corrected software before it reached the road. Frontline experience became part of every update instead of something hidden inside forgotten notes. One autumn afternoon, Eli left the office at exactly 3 o'clock. For the first time in years, he wasn't apologizing for leaving early. He was simply going to pick up his daughter. The blue felt mitten, carefully repaired by June with straighter stitches than before, hung once again behind his employee badge, not as a reminder that he belonged to the company, as a reminder where he truly belonged. Outside an elementary school, June climbed into the passenger seat smiling. "I knew you'd make it. I told you I'd try." "You did. And this time," she laughed, "you were early." As they drove home, an accessible Lakeshore van passed through the intersection. Denise was behind the wheel. Miles Carter sat by the window. He noticed Eli immediately. With a quiet smile, he lifted a laminated picture card toward the glass. The bridge was no longer red. It was green, safe to cross. Eli smiled and raised his hand in return. Back at headquarters, Camille paused outside the dispatch office. A young driver was explaining why a route should be adjusted, even though the software marked it as efficient. Months earlier, she might have interrupted. Instead, she listened. She asked questions. She took notes, because she had learned that spreadsheets measured distance. People measured trust. Some lessons arrived through success. Others arrived the moment a frightened father quietly placed his badge on a desk and refused to exchange a child's safety for his own security. Neither Eli nor Camille ever framed that badge. They didn't need to. The real reminder wasn't hanging on a wall. It was living in every safer route, every protected employee, every parent who could trust the journey home, and every ordinary afternoon when a father arrived at school exactly when his daughter was waiting. The road ahead wasn't perfect, but it was finally safe enough for people to walk it together. The road ahead wasn't perfect, but it was finally safe enough for people to walk it together. When Miles held up that green bridge card, it wasn't just a picture anymore. It was proof that one father's courage had quietly made the road safer for children he might never even meet. Eli's story reminds us that real dignity isn't found in keeping a job at any cost. It comes from refusing to trade away what you know is right. One honest decision, even when it scares you, can change far more lives than you ever imagined. Today, think about one place in your own life where you've stayed silent because speaking up felt too risky. The next time that moment comes, remember what Eli chose. Not because it was easy, but because someone else was depending on him. If this story touched your heart, leave a 1 in the comments so I know it stayed with you. And tell me this. Have you ever had to choose between doing what was safe for yourself and doing what was right for someone else? I'd love to read your story. Until next time, take care of yourself. Because the next story might remind you that the smallest decision can change someone else's entire journey.